Hi again, everybody. I'm Chief Meteorologist Mike Iscovitz, and it's Mondays with Mike. This is our opportunity to kind of talk about what's happening with weather lately, maybe some weather myths, weather lessons, answering some weather questions. Well, today we're talking about lessons learned from Hurricane Beryl, the Category 1 hurricane that actually hit 1 week ago today. So we didn't have a Mondays with Mike last week because we were in the middle of hurricane coverage, a hurricane that made landfall at 4 a.m. down around Matagorda and pounded the entire Houston area for most of that morning and heading into the early afternoon. So I wanted to talk about my thoughts on some of the lessons learned. Now, this is not a completely comprehensive list. I've come up with the top 10 my top 10 lessons learned from Hurricane Beryl that I thought I would pass along to you. If you have anything to add to this, please let me know. I actually do have a link at the top of my Facebook page that will allow you to post some of your thoughts. So number one is Category 1 hurricanes can be substantial. Category 1 hurricanes can be very serious. I know that we've had Category 1 hurricanes. For example, it was just 3 years ago in 2021 that we had Hurricane Nicholas, which was a Category 1. Now, Nicholas made landfall in almost the same spot, actually, not too far away. It hit at a different angle and it sort of looped out of the area before it moved over the city of Houston, technically. But it did knock out power. We did bring some winds above 50 miles per hour, knocked down some fences, trees, things like that. So it was not an inconsequential storm. In fact, I think, if I recall correctly, it did knock down my fence. Ended up costing me and my neighbors a chunk of change. So, and of course, that was a Category 1, but nothing like what Beryl was. So despite the fact that it was, as we see, only a Category 1, remember the wind speeds, the maximum sustained wind speeds with Beryl were rated at 80 miles per hour when it made landfall, which actually puts it as a lower end Category 1. The problem is that there were a lot of higher gusts within those sustained winds. So we had wind gusts across the area above 80 miles per hour, even just in Houston. Hobby Airport, 84 mile per hour maximum wind gust, 83 mile per hour wind gust at Bush Intercontinental Airport. And at the University of Houston, there was a measured wind gust of 89 miles per hour. Now, some of those wind gusts were at some elevation above the surface. Maybe it's 3 meters or 4 meters. We're talking about maybe 2 stories up, maybe even 3. But keep in mind, that's what affects a lot of homes and businesses and trees and things like that, are the winds that are above the ground. So I would say, above all, above everything, the number one lesson learned from Beryl is that Category 1 hurricanes can be very serious. All right, the second thing learned from Beryl is that the electricity will go out and you should prepare accordingly. Now, that was one of my, even before we knew how crazy the winds were going to be, the two things that I focused on were the flooding threat and the fact that power was going to go out. Of course, didn't know it was going to be out for still through today in some spots. Some people are going to go like 7 to 10 days with no electricity. But I think we've learned at this point that whenever we get hit by hurricanes or even tropical storms or even sometimes severe thunderstorms like the derecho back in mid-May, that the electricity is going to go out. And it's a big scandal. I know this is going to be something that is talked about even in Congress and everything, or at least the state of Texas, for a long time, about the response of, not calling anybody out, but the response of certain providers. Were they ready enough? Did they throw enough resources in our direction? Were the crews staged correctly? But that's not really what I wanted to talk about. What I wanted to talk about was the second lesson learned, which is count on the power going out. We could be hopeful and say, well, maybe the power won't go out. Or we could be hopeful and say, maybe the power will only go out for a short amount of time. But the reality is we need to at least plan for the fact that electricity is going to be out for several days. The next time a storm hits, we all need to make sure that we're prepared, that the power is going to be out. So that means, what are some simple things you need to do? Well, you probably do not want to have a refrigerator and freezer filled with food. People lost hundreds of dollars of food, and not to mention the fact that, food that you needed to live, right? FEMA is coming through on that. I know folks that are on SNAP benefits and WIC and stuff are going to be able to get reimbursed for that loss of food, but it didn't help at the time. It may help afterward. So that's one of the things. The other thing is, are you going to be able to sort of mentally prepare yourself to cope with living in an environment where you might not have lights or fans or electricity? So count on the electricity going out. That's our new rule. Okay, it's going to go out. Okay, number 3 is that, and we always recommend this ahead of time, to, part of your preparations before a storm hits is to gas up the car, and you get cash out of the bank, and you get the non-perishable foods and things like that. But I think this lesson was reinforced by the fact that we had a lot of problems in the wake of Beryl with the electricity going out. And I don't know about you, but I know for myself, there were lots and lots of gas stations near my house, and even within a 10-mile radius of my house, where you couldn't get gas. You couldn't get gas for about probably 3 days, maybe 4 days at some gas stations because there was no electricity. And so gassing up the car ahead of time, was a smart thing to do. We had in our household, I have one, the old one. My wife has one, and then my daughters have one. So we made sure that my wife's was fueled up, topped off. So that really helped, and it bought us a little bit of time to drive around and do the things we needed to do. So filling the gas tank beforehand is a huge advantage to have. Also, there were some places that were not accepting credit card or debit card payments. So having cash was a good thing to have as well. Also, getting that food was important because the grocery stores weren't open for a while, or at least most of them weren't. So if you, in an emergency, had to get that food, let's just say, for example, God forbid, baby food, things like that. Maybe important medications for you or for somebody in your family. Even pet food. If you don't have access to a pharmacy or to a grocery store that you're used to going to, well, now you're really in some dire straits. So the advice of going and getting all of that stuff early is not only important, but now we've experienced just how vital it is to get all of that stuff ahead of time. All right, number 4, generators. They're great. I got to tell you, I invested in a relatively small generator about a year ago. I got it on sale on Amazon. It was not extremely expensive. It was about $400. It runs on both propane and gasoline. I love the fact that it runs on propane. I would encourage you to look into those because not having to store gas is so much better than having to store gasoline, in the garage. But generators can be a huge help. Even if maybe you can only afford a small one, it's enough. It's a big deal just to have lights, fans, a way to charge your phone. It allows you to make it through those few days of discomfort a little bit more comfortably. And the bigger and better generator you can afford, the better off you'll be. I know that there are some people that have those really fancy whole home generators that, 360 days out of the year, 363 days out of the year, it's like, I can't believe they're paying for that. And then there was this couple of days where it's like, oh my gosh, how nice would it be to have, a generator that keeps your whole home going. So I don't know, that's something to think about. There are probably some other options I need to do more research on for you guys, and maybe JD and I'll talk about it, like solar panels and batteries that store energy from the solar panels for nighttime lights and stuff. So anyway, that's something that we'll need to look at. But I think generators are great. You need to use them safely, obviously, and but telling you, if you can afford one, get them on sale, maybe off season or in between hurricanes, like maybe later this month. I think you'll be able to find some deals. So, and make sure to do all of your proper research on how to safely operate them. If you're a complete newbie, complete beginner, there's a little bit of a learning curve of how to do that. Number 5, some forecasts aren't great. All right. Sometimes a forecast is nailed 5, 6, 7 days ahead of time. Sometimes it isn't. In this case, I think if you were to go back and really look, because I have, and this was really the setup, is that 72 hours out, so a full 3 days before landfall, so it made landfall on Monday morning. If you went back to Friday morning, that's when the storm is just hitting to the south of Cancun, just moving into the Yucatan. And at that point, the 5-day forecast from the National Hurricane Center, obviously, and we all know this, showed the storm going into northern Mexico. Houston was barely on the outside of the cone of uncertainty. So Houston was not even in the cone 3 days out. However, 2 days out, which would have been Saturday morning, we were definitely in the cone. And in fact, at that point, we were placed under tropical storm watches that were later upgraded to hurricane watches. So there was some time to prepare. I know it wasn't as much as we would have liked to have had. I know that probably the wind speeds inland were a bit unexpected. I would say completely unexpected. How far inland? Livingston, Liberty, the Woodlands, and even Katy, and all these spots that got really pretty extreme winds. Was that anticipated? No. But we were pretty good on the rainfall forecast, and I think as far as the cone of uncertainty and the forecast path, it wasn't great until about 2 days ahead of time, and even then, there was some error involved. So that's one thing to be aware of. Sometimes the forecast, most of the time I would say, most of the time the forecast is going to be pretty darn good. This wasn't one of those times. And so, it might have snuck up on us, although it wasn't a last second type of thing. I mean, we definitely did have some time. All right, so number 6 is to expect and plan for some of those possible weather changes. One of the rules of thumb is that you generally want to prepare for one category higher. So if there's a tropical storm coming, you should be prepared as if there's going to be a hurricane. If there's a category 1 coming, you should be prepared as if there's a category 2, and so on. In this case, I think, given the fact that we were under tropical storm watches and warnings, those were the times that we should have been, prepared for a hurricane. And this is something to remember for anything in the future, especially anything that's pointed south of us. So if there's a storm that's headed toward Brownsville, a storm that's headed toward Corpus Christi, we end up on the dirty side. Storms that move into Louisiana, very often we suffer very few impacts. But you need to be prepared for any change in that. If we're in the cone or even near the cone, you need to make those preparations. Even, Houston Mayor Whitmire even alluded to that in some of the interviews that we had with him this past weekend, which was basically what he said was, he was criticizing Centerpoint, but what he basically said was, hey, look, maybe the storm didn't look like it was coming straight at us, but we always have to prepare for that if it's anywhere in the region. So I think that was a lesson learned, maybe a lesson learned for all of us, in fact, that we need to be just a little bit more cognizant of the fact that the forecast can change, and also that hurricanes have much bigger impacts than just tracking a little dot on the map, which is why, we talked about, don't focus on the line and that kind of thing, that these storms are very big and we were going to be on the dirty side and all of that, which initially looked like it was going to be mostly a rainfall threat, which of course we did flood quite badly. But it was that wind threat that was really pretty wild. Number 7, if you, and this is just my personal opinion, it's not an evacuation order, okay? But my opinion is that if you feel like you wouldn't be able to cope with not having electricity for a few days, maybe if you have the means, you should think about leaving. Now, I'm not talking about evacuating per se, but I'll give you one example. When Hurricane Ike hit, my oldest daughters, who were about to be seniors in high school, were babies. And so, of course, I had to be at work. I was scared to death about my wife being at home with my 2, not even 2-year-olds. They weren't even 2 yet. Like 21 months old-ish, 22, something like that. But anyway, so I said, you know what? I'm going to send you out west. So I ended up getting a very inexpensive hotel room, which she wasn't happy with, but in Austin. So it was near the Capitol. It was like a La Quinta or something. And even though it wasn't like the lap of luxury, when she came back, all of our neighbors said, be happy you left, because they said it was frightening. And a lot of you remember Hurricane Ike, 2008, so the early morning hours of September the 13th, 2008. Frightening, it really was. Category 2, giant one, huge storm surge, winds that were even higher than what we saw in Beryl, and just power was out for like 3 weeks to some areas. But the bottom line is, in that case, I said, you know what, we have babies, and if I can, if you have the means to maybe get out of town, again, not a desperate evacuation, but it's something to think about. And it's the same thing if you have elderly family members. If you can go stay with friends and family in San Antonio or Austin or Dallas or whatever, versus risking staying here, it's something to think about. I am not recommending that everybody leave. That's a terrible idea. Okay, we learned that during Hurricane Rita. Terrible idea. But there are certain vulnerable populations, very young, very old, maybe people with disabilities and stuff, you might want to think about maybe leaving the area. That's my personal opinion. All right, number 8 is to beware of trees. This is so sad. It really is. We had we had fatalities during the May 16th derecho from trees that were knocked down. We had fatalities from Hurricane Beryl, where trees fell on houses. Absolute nightmare scenarios where the family is home. One family member is in a room. The tree falls on the room. The other family members, I'm awful, awful, awful. Can't even imagine what that's like going through. Losing one of your beloved family members literally in the next room. Luck of the draw. Awful. But, there are a lot of neighborhoods here that have large trees, especially if you live in an older, more developed neighborhood. Like I know some streets, like on my street, we kind of have like medium-sized trees, and there are some really new neighborhoods that have almost no trees or tiny little trees. And then you have these beautiful neighborhoods with like canopy trees, and then places like Kingwood and Tomball and the Woodlands, and where you have these old, giant, beautiful trees that most of the time are great because they provide shade and it's pretty and all that stuff. But when we have 80 mile per hour winds, 85 mile per hour winds can be deadly. Now, I don't personally know what the solution to that is, other than assessing your risk before the storm comes in. So you may have to ask somebody, ask your neighbors, get some input, maybe from some experts about, and by experts I mean like people who know about pruning trees and stuff, which parts of your house would be at risk for having a tree fall on it, and determining where those areas are, and maybe avoiding them, or determining maybe a go-to space in the house that you think is in the middle and is maybe more protected from any potential falling trees. This is something that has happened repeatedly. It's one of the main ways that people have gotten hurt or killed here with hurricanes. And it's happened too much recently. It's awful, absolutely awful. One thing I wanted to say is, I know a lot of times, and I push this even in like our editorial meetings, I always try to remind people, look, a lot of people live in apartments. Not everybody's in a house. And in this case, I wanted to let you know that apartments pose different challenges, different frustrations. And I'll share a story with you that in our case, my mother-in-law is in an apartment, and long story short, electricity went down. She's not on the first floor. She's up. The elevator does not work. And the power only came back on, I think, yesterday. So 6 days, maybe 7 days of no electricity. You've got hundreds of elderly people, many of which can't walk down the stairs. She could. We went and helped her walk down the stairs, but who have nowhere to go, can't get down the stairs unless somebody literally carries them down the stairs. And by the way, the stairs are tiny little dangerous stairs too. So we're furious, really. Like they're getting out of there. We're furious. So my advice is to check with apartment management now, okay, when there's not a storm coming, and ask them, what are your preparations for a hurricane? In other words, do you have generators that you're willing to operate in the building? If there is an elevator, does the elevator work, or will you have a way for the elevator to work if we lose power? Or do you have people to help? If you live in maybe an apartment complex, with just stairs that doesn't have an elevator, what's the electricity situation? What's going to be the situation? What are the disaster plans that you, the apartment management, have to help everyone stay safe during a hurricane? And if their answer is you're on your own, then at least you know that you're on your own. So, which I think is probably going to be the case in most of these places. So I want you to be aware of that. If you live in an apartment, try to ask management ahead of time. Some places might be great, and they might say, hey, look, we have generators. We're going to make sure everybody's reasonably taken care of. We're maybe going to use the clubhouse or something as a cooling center, whatever. But I suspect the vast majority are going to tell you to take a hike. That's just my opinion. Number 10 finally is, and here's another serious thing, kind of along the lines of the trees. Driving during a hurricane is extremely dangerous. Now, I'll just tell you this because we're kind of nearing the end of Mondays with Mike here. There was an overturned tractor trailer on the West Belt when the hurricane was hitting. Wind toppled. I mean, you had like a 70-mile-an-hour crosswind knock down the 18-wheeler. You would not believe the number of cars that were on the road, stuck in a traffic jam behind the tractor trailer. But it's not the traffic jam that's the problem. Somebody could have literally been next to the tractor trailer, to the 18-wheeler when it flipped over. We can't do that. I mean, the hurricane was literally hitting and the roadways were filled with people. So that was a mistake. And we had a water rescue on 288. There's certain places, gosh, that 288 corridor at 610 and near McGregor and all those spots floods like clockwork. It's like you can count on it flooding. So we need everybody to please, please, please stay off the road during a hurricane, unless it's a dire emergency. I mean, if you got to run to the emergency room for something, obviously. But these are my top 10 things that I came up with, lessons learned from Beryl. Maybe you have some suggestions. Let me know on my Facebook page. Just search Fox 26 Mike on Facebook. That'll do it for Mondays with Mike. I want to give a shout out to my mom and Neil back home in Florida. And let's hope that it is a season that all of those storms stay out in the Atlantic. Thanks for watching.